Right.
You're all set.
You're full screen now?
Yes.
Hooray. Okay, that's me, Andrew Barron, ZL3DW. Okay. I just picked this up off the internet. You can tell it's not my car because I'm still married. And also that's a left-hand drive car, so we'll have to put that down to you guys. Okay, this is where I am, down in the bottom left there, and where you guys are up in the top right there. And the little blob, a little yellow blob is Christchurch. That's where I am in New Zealand. It's a couple of shots of the environs of the city. So it's pastoral land, mostly dairying and some cropping. And we have a range of mountains which runs right down the middle of the South Island, and that's we call the Southern Alps. We're not very imaginative when it comes to naming things. So the big island at the top is called the North Island, and the little island at the south is called the South Island. So not very imaginative. And then we have Stewart Island at the end of that, and we have another group of islands off the side of the map, virtually straight out from Christchurch, which are called the Chatham Islands. They're very small, and there's a lot of fishing and crayfishing and so forth. So that's where we come from, where I come from. Okay, these are the books that I've written, all ham radio books. I started off writing because I'm a sort of a guy that, like a lot of hams, that wants to find out how things work. And then once I've found out how things work, I like to pass that on to other people so that they don't have to do all that research and hard thinking. And so I ended up writing a lot of magazine articles about software-defined radio. I was very keen to get a software-defined radio because things like the ICOM IC756 and so things like that were coming out, and I wanted one of those and I couldn't afford one. So I got involved with software-defined radio quite early on. And then I wrote some articles about SDR, and I got to the point where I wanted to write about the actual, I'd written a lot about the hardware and not much about the software. So I wanted to write about the actual SDR programs and how they worked, and it was too big. You could not fit it into magazine articles very well. So I thought, well, if I can't fit it into magazine articles, I'll write a book. And so I wrote that book, Introduction to HF Software Defined Radio, up on the top left, and it did okay. I was hopeful that it might sell 100 copies, and it sold a bit more than that. And so I was pretty happy that was back in 2014. And I thought I could do better than that and write a more general, less technical book for a wider audience. And so I wrote the software-defined radio book, the SDR book. So that's what kicked it all off. I was after they'd been selling on Amazon and Kindle for a couple of years, the RSGB approached me and said they would like to publish a UK edition of it. So they did. And that's sparked off a collaboration with RSGB, and they have now published all my other titles as well. So that's been very good, and I get to sell them worldwide through Amazon and through Kindle, and they concentrate on the UK, and they are actually different editions. The Amazon versions are written in US English with US spelling, and the English RSGB versions are written with UK spelling, which is the same as New Zealand spelling, which is a little bit different. We don't, we put a U in colour, and we don't use as many Zs and things like synchronization or analyzer. So there you go. So I wrote that book, and it did quite well. And so I thought, well, what am I going to write about now? Write about what you know, Andrew. So I was keen on satellites. and had done quite a bit of work with satellites. So I wrote AMSATs and HAMSATs, which is it's a sort of step-by-step guide on how to access the amateur radio satellites, and also quite a big history of the amateur radio series. There's been a lot of amateur radio satellites, and there's probably 20 or so up at the moment. It's been getting bigger and bigger. It's also been getting more and more expensive and difficult to launch amateur radio satellites. The free rides that we used to get in the 1970s and 80s are long, long gone. So yeah, so they were doing okay, and I had the interest in SDRs, and ICOM released the IC7610, which is a software-defined radio with knobs. And I thought, wow, I've got to have one of those. So I bought one with all my ill-gotten book money. Yeah, I bought one of those, and I liked it very much, but I thought that the manual was left a lot to be desired. It's perfectly adequate as far as a manual. The problem is that you need to know the answer before you look something up. So you look up, I don't know, the receiver squelch, and it says this is the receiver squelch control. It squelches the receiver, and you go, okay, and you look up mic gain, and it says this is the mic gain control. It adjusts the mic gain, and you go, excellent, but what do I adjust it to? And when do I adjust it, and what do I use it for? And so I thought there was room there for a book. And so I wrote the Radio Today guide to the ICOM IC7610. And it did quite well. It's been very good. So it's a great radio, and software-defined technology and so forth. So I liked it a lot. And then I thought, what am I going to write about now? And I thought, I'll write about the IC7300, which had just been released. But I couldn't get one because they take a long time to get down to our part of the world. They're released in the Northern Hemisphere first, where the big market is. And it takes about 6 months to 8 months before we start getting them. We sort of get the second batch of them. So I couldn't lay my hands on one of those, but I could get a 9700. So I bought one of those and wrote about that. And then I got the 7300 and wrote about that. And as you know, I've just written about the IC705 as well, and that book only came out last week. The 7300 sells around about 10, well, almost 10 to 1 more than all the other books, because the radio is so incredibly popular. And to my mind, ICOM have really stolen a march here. They've released 4 new radios in the space of a couple of years, and they're all groundbreaking in their own ways. The 7300 is just mind-blowing. The features that it has, it has Vox, and it has a tuner, and it has the band scope, and all those things that you just couldn't get in a radio of that price point. And just when you think they couldn't do any better, they released the 9700, which is the first VHF, UHF radio with a band scope and with all those other features. And so that was amazing. And now they've done it again with a QRP radio that you can take out on SOTA or just take to the park or whatever. And it's got D-Star, it's got HF and VHF and UHF. It's amazing technology. Then actually between the 7300 book and the 705 book, I went back to why don't you write about things you know, and I did a book about radio testing. I'd been playing with a lot of little kit sets that you can get on the internet, and I'd always was interested in radio testing. I come from a radio background, a working background, and I found some of these little kits and things quite interesting, quite cheap. The problem with setting up your own lab for doing radio testing has always been that the test equipment costs too much. It's all aimed at professional cell site companies and so forth. And you know, a decent spectrum analyzer used to cost about $20,000, and a counter would cost $10,000, and it just becomes astronomical. But some of these little kits and things are really very good, and they don't cost you a bomb. So half the book's about that, and then the other half is about the lab testing that you see done in magazine articles and on the Sherwood list and things like that. The QST sort of tests that they do, and it's about why do you do that, what does it tell you about the radio, and how to do it if you have the gear. But you don't have to have the gear to appreciate that part of the book. And then the other book that I'm working on at the moment, I was a bit worried I was becoming known as an ICOM guru or an ICOM fanboy, if you like. And so I'm writing a book about the Yaesu FTDX 101, the D and the MP. They're so similar that they basically can fit in the same book. The MP's got a few extra goodies that the D model doesn't have, but basically under the skin they're the same. So yeah, that's the next book, and I probably will write about the FTDX 10 when that becomes available. So that's a bit of history about the books. Now, Jim asked me to talk about some of the different approaches of the ham radio manufacturers and the features that many of us don't bother using, me included. And that made me think. For a start, everybody has their favorite brand, and there's a lot of brand loyalty out there. You go on the forums and you see people write and they say, oh, I've got a Yaesu and it's the best radio and I wouldn't touch one of those SDR rubbishy things. And then the ICOM forum say exactly the same thing, and so does the Kenwood forum and everybody else. Everybody, there's a lot of brand loyalty out there, and a lot of people are very reluctant to try anything new. So you've got to overcome that hurdle and try and be fair across all the technologies. Now, although I've written 4 books now about ICOMs, I was really a Yaesu guy. I've always had Yaesu radios up until the time I bought the 7610. I've never owned a Kenwood radio. They are very good, but I've never owned one. And they were actually becoming extremely difficult to buy now. I do own an Apache Labs radio, the NN100, which is one of the first, I think it was the first 100-watt SDR. So that was great. And it's an excellent radio, but you do need to have your PC on when you use it. It hasn't got any knobs on the front. Okay. So I've just got a few slides. Here's my timer. Okay, I've got a few slides here to try and address what Jim was asking about. What are they thinking? Okay, so this Kenwood's excellent performance. I think they're getting a bit behind the times. They don't have any SDR models, and the latest TS, the TS890, it costs as much as an IC7610 or an FTDX 101, but they've only got one receiver and there's no SDR technology. I thought it was funny, they described the screen, the band scope, A touch panel has been employed to add an element of fun to the transceiver function, such as by allowing the frequency at a point to be set when you touch the point on the band scope screen. So they obviously haven't really bought into the whole SDR experience yet. The other thing is, as I said, they're getting very, very difficult to buy. You can still buy them in the US, but you cannot buy them in anywhere in Australasia or Australia or New Zealand anyway. All those dealers that used to sell them don't sell Kenwoods anymore, and there's only one dealer left in the UK as well. So, and I believe there are quite significant supply issues with Kenwoods. The main reason that I haven't written a book about Kenwoods is that they have the best user manual of all of the radios. They're extremely good, much better than the ICOM or the Yaesu manuals. So that doesn't really leave a market for me to exploit, to help. So ICOM, I think they're very innovative. They're great value for money. The 7300 is selling thousands of radios. I've no idea how many because it's a jealously guarded secret, but you can tell, I can tell from the book sales, but also from the emails that I get that they are becoming pretty dominant, and you can tell from your club how many people have got one. And they've produced about 4 new models in the last 2 years. Nobody else has done that. Yaesu's a bit behind. They've only just produced the 101, which is their first SDR, and Kenwood are yet to produce an SDR at all. All the ICOMs have got new features that have never been seen before in that class. So the 7300, as I said before, is just incredible value for money, and includes a lot of things that were only available on the real high-end radios before that. 705 is a rig with a band scope and D-Star and HF and VHF all built into the same little box. Amazing that they can fit it all in there. It's a very complicated radio. It only has 14 controls on the front panel, but boy, inside it's very, very complicated because it's got all the features of the 9700 and the 7300 pretty much. It doesn't have all the bands and it doesn't have a satellite mode, but basically it's the same. And the same thing goes for the 9700. It's a multi-mode rig, VHF, UHF, tri-bander with a band scope and satellite mode and D-Star. One difference in the philosophy with ICOM is ICOM lets you adjust everything. So it's a little bit like the Mercedes-Benz that you can decide how long the lights stay on when you leave the car and things like that. ICOM lets you adjust every single little thing. Anything that can be adjusted, you can adjust, and that leaves a lot of scope for me with the book because you know, if you get right into the menu system, you can get lost pretty easily. Yaesu concentrates on performance, very high performance, very big box. I've written the FD-DX101 is considerably bigger than the ICOM equivalent, but they're lacking behind in the features and in getting new models to market. And the band scope on the new radio always feels like an afterthought, like we've developed this incredibly high performance radio. It's really good. Oh, everybody wants a band scope. Let's pop one on. It's a bit clunky. It could get better because it's all firmware, and really hoping that it will. But at the moment, it's nowhere near as good as the ICOM one, in my humble opinion anyway. And I know that's probably going to upset all the Yaesu fans, but so be it. Yaesu doesn't let you adjust everything. It gives you limited things like, I think there's 10 different color settings that you can put on this, on the waterfall and spectrum. most of which are pretty gaudy. So you compare that with the Icon, where you can set those things to any color at all, because you get full RGB control. So you can make it vary from pink to black, no problem. Also, the Yaesu is a hybrid radio, so things like the Icon has a filter button, and you get continuous control of the filter bandwidth. You can't do that on a hybrid radio, so it's got front end filters like a standard superhit radio has. That said, it is #1 on the Sherwood list and has the best receiver that you can buy according to Sherwood at any price. So it is a very good radio. I do think that the band scope's a bit of an add-on. The FT10 is going to be interesting. I don't know whether you've looked at it on the internet and things. I've seen the adverts. They seem to come out about a year before the radio does. Now, this radio is a sort of cut down FTDX 101 with only one receiver, and it's clearly supposed to compete head on with the IC7300. Judging by the big radio, I suspect it's going to struggle to take that market off Icom. I think that Icom's got a really big head start, and I suspect there's probably a better radio. Although, again, the receiver is very, very good in the FT10 because it borrows the receiver from the FTDX 101. So, controversial, I don't know. But yeah, my guess is that the 7300 will continue to dominate for some time. Using all the features. It's not working. Many people develop operating habits that may mean that they're missing out on some of the features of the new radios. And some people just never use them right in the first place. These new radios, they have much, much better receivers than the transceivers made in the 2000s on. I do a lot of radio testing, and it's a struggle now to buy test equipment that's actually better than the radios. The phase noise of the oscillators particularly is really much improved, and the selectivity of the radios is much improved on the old radios. And much, much, much better than the receivers from the 70s and 80s. That's mostly because they use synthesized oscillators, which were noisy, and the new local oscillators are so much better. And that improves both your transmitter quality and your receiver selectivity. It just means that you're not introducing noise into the signal, and which you don't want to do. So the transmitters are better, but there hasn't been as much improvement. So, using all the features, well, the band scope is the big thing. That's the big thing that has come over the last few years, band scope or pan adapter if you're talking in SDR terms. So it shows you the signals across the band. It's really important if you're looking at a dead band, you can see someone called pop-up and call CQ that you just might miss. If you didn't have the band scope, you just might tune across and happen to be tuned across when they weren't talking, and you'd never know they were there. So so that's a really big plus of the new technology. I like the two receivers. You don't get that in the 7300, but you do in the 7610 and the new Yaesu, because you can just sit the second receiver on a band, wait for your net to start, wait for a DX station to pop up while you're tuning around, and just leave it sitting there with the squelch on. And also, it's really, really handy if you're working DX, because you can listen to the DX station without retuning, and you can listen to the pile-up as well, and you can find a nice quiet spot in the pile-up. You can also, if you're really clever, work out which way a DX station tends to work a station, move up the band a little bit, work the next station, move up the band a little bit, and when they get to the top of the pile-up, then they start working back down again. So if you can hear that, and you can find out which way they're going, you can position your transmitter so that you're the next one in line or the one after that. And that can really improve your ability to work a pilot, particularly if you're not a big station. Improved dynamic range and selectivity means you can work a contest without your radio that's meant to be swapped with intermodulation noise. I'm always amused when you hear some old timers going, oh, there's a contest on there, they're creating hash all across the band and I can't hear anything. That's not the contest, that's their receiver's intermodulation caused by the multiple big signals coming in and mixing together in the receiver stage, causing all sorts of horrible noise and hash. But that's not a fault of the contest station, that is a fault of the poor receiver that these guys are using. Okay, DSP noise reduction, noise blankets, notch filters. They are simply amazing, particularly on CW. Some of these CW filters are so good now, and the narrow bandwidth that you can achieve with an SDR it's like listening to a Morse oscillator. You get, I can remember with my old FT301, and there was no bandwidth control at all, and no filters. And so you got the full 3 kilohertz of CW at once, and you had to pick out the tone that you wanted to listen to. These new filters, you can filter it down so you have a nice clean signal. There's only one, and it makes it so much easier. That said, I'm still pretty rubbish at Morse code. RF gain control. All the receivers have always had RF gain control. Most people never ever use them. But they really can help, particularly on the low bands. If you pull the gain control down, you can improve the signal to noise ratio and pull a weak CW signal out. I have to put my hand up. I'm just as bad as everybody else. I hardly ever turn down the RF gain control, but it is worth doing. Okay. Oh, the other thing, not so much with the current radios with knobs, but the SDRs, the traditional SDRs like the Flex radio and the Apache radio, which is using power SDR, you can actually pull the receiver bandwidth in to exactly match the width of the transmitter that you're listening to. And that means that you're not listening to any noise that's on the side of that signal, because there's no point listening wider than the transmitted signal bandwidth. All you're doing is making it noisier and harder to listen to. So that's a real advantage, being able to see that and then pull that bandwidth in so that you're just not listening to any noise on either side. Very handy to be able to do that. I think I mentioned CW before, so we won't cover that. RTT, RTTY, it's hardly ever used. I don't know why the ICOM radios are very fond of RTTY. It must be big in Japan, perhaps. And they have a RTTY decoder in them, and they can send RTTY directly from the radio. And one thing they do have, which also the Power SDR radios have, is a twin peaking filter. And what that does, it's an audio DSP filter, and it just peaks the 2 tone frequencies and gives them a wee boost. It dramatically improves your decodes. If you are using the radio for RTTY, use it, because it is so much better. The other thing that's probably newest with the new radios is one cable, one USB cable to the PC. It does everything. It does all the CAT controls. It does all the audio. It does the PTT switching and does the RTTY or CW signal all over one cable. No need for an external interface box or a rig blaster or any of those things, and no mess of cables. 8 minutes. I reckon that's pretty good. The next few slides are just some, it's actually out of another presentation I did for a thing that we call Westfest. What we do in the South Island is every year we have either Westfest or Eastfest. Eastfest is about an hour. It's in either Methven or Ashburton, which is about an hour south or west of Christchurch. And it's an informal conference where you rock up and you pay $10 for the hall, and they put on some tea and bickies or coffee, and a series of people do short talks, 30-40 minutes, and on whatever they've been doing, whatever's new in their life, and there's no real structure. And then we all go out for a meal, and the next day we repeat it, and then we go home. And so it's very informal and a good idea. And then when we're not doing Eastfest, the year after that we do Westfest, which is in Murchison. So Eastfest, we get the people from Dunedin, Ashburton, Timaru, and so the people south of Christchurch. And then on Westfest, we get the Nelson and Blenheim people, which are north of Christchurch. And it's the same formula. So, yeah, this is what kicked off the testing book. I had a demonstration at Westfest of how you measure the length of a piece of coax cable using a very simple pulse generator and an oscilloscope. And I thought, yeah, that's a neat thing. And that's what kind of kicked off the whole book. I don't think I'll go through this. One of the things about the magazine articles, this comes out of QST, and they have this very neat key measurement summary, which is really good if you don't actually understand what the tests are. You can look and say, well, look, it's in the green, so it must be good. And I think that's an excellent thing to have. The only problem is, if you go back to a QST review of a radio in the 1970s, it's also going to have things over in the green because the goalposts move, and they constantly shift that sort of right end of the scale. And so just because you pick up an old QST and it's got all these little arrows over on the green side doesn't mean to say that that radio is actually good by modern standards. Moving the goalpost. Okay, I'm going to leave it there. I could go on, but I want to leave some time for questions. So I'll kill the PowerPoint, and there I am back again. Well, I've only got a picture. I'm not sure. Stop share. That's what I want to do. Okay, I'm back. So, any questions? I hope that wasn't too fast or difficult to understand.
Yeah, Andrew, I have a question. Recently, ICOM has been updating their radios, and I don't know if you want to talk for a minute about updating those systems. I've read a couple of things that kind of made me balk a little bit about it, indicated that if you did it wrong, you'd completely disable your radio and have to take it into the dealer to be repaired. So.
Yep. So the thing about software-defined radios, and actually all DSP radios really, is that the manufacturer can tinker with the software and make improvements to the radio, and you can do all sorts of things. You could add extra modes to the radio. Pretty much any function that's in the radio you can change. It's not necessarily just bug fixes. In fact, the latest ICOM firmware upgrade adds a thing called presets. And what that allows you to do is you set up a preset, and then you can push a button and it sets the radio up for FT8 or any digital mode. say, for instance, you were using a piece of software that didn't like the current ICOM address, and you had to pretend the radio was a different kind of ICOM, like WSJT used to be. They have now just fixed it, but it used to be with WSJT, it didn't have the 7300 or it didn't have the IC705 in it, and so you had to fool it into thinking it was a different model, and you had to change the ICOM address. Now you can do that with this preset function. So it's quite a useful function. And there's a few other things in that latest firmware release. Now, Jim was saying that it's a bit scary. And if you look at the manual, you'll find, and actually when you actually go through the process, you find it brings up some great big yellow boxes saying, do you really want to do this? Do you want to? It's pretty scary. And then it says, you say, yes, I do want to. And then it brings up another yellow box saying, do you really want to do it? And you go, yeah, I do, I think. And eventually you get brave and you say yes, and it works flawlessly, it works perfectly. Technically, yes, you could brick the radio if it happened to power down while it was doing a firmware upgrade. You could brick the radio and end up with nothing. But generally, I haven't had any problems at all, and I do recommend upgrading the firmware to the latest version because it does give you some extra bug fixes and it does give you some extra features, so it's worth doing.
Particularly, they've added an FT8 to it. Correct? Does that do all the other settings that you should have for FT8? Does it adjust all of that? Yeah,
it does. It's just a preset. So all it does is set the radio with the right to the right SSBD mode with the right filter settings and things like that. So it's not magic. It's not actually doing FT8 for you. It's just preparing the radio as you would do normally to use FT8. It's quite nice in that you can just turn it back off again and everything goes back to the way it was. And you can use it for.
They've added that on which models of the ICOM? Is that all those models?
It's on the 7300, on the 705, and the 9700, but not, as far as I'm aware, on the 7610.
Okay, that's what I wondered, because I hadn't seen any mention of the 7610 in that, and I was kind of surprised actually.
Yeah, as far as I know, they probably will do it on that as well, but they haven't as yet. Yeah, I wouldn't be too worried about it. The only thing I should say about before you do a firmware update, you must do a save to the SD card of your current config, because the firmware update will get rid of all your memories, and it can wipe out all your customizations, your screen colors and things like that. It doesn't always wipe them all, but sometimes it does. So yeah, save a copy, very easy to do, onto the SD card, then do the firmware update, and if it has upset anything, then you can just download that file again and put all the radio back the way it was, and the firmware won't be affected by that. So yeah, it's just you've saved memories and screen colors and timers and all those things that you can set in the ICOM. They'll get wiped out by the firmware update, so you want to have it backed up.
Andrew, this is Anthony. After you write the books, I'm assuming that you get a lot of email from people asking you questions about the radio because you're out there. Do you get a lot of emails?
Thankfully, I don't get too many, but I do feel like I'm become the world's help desk at times, and sometimes you get abusive emails. I usually just blacklist those. But yeah, occasionally I do, and if it's a genuine thing, I usually try and help them out as best I can. People think I'm an expert, which is not true. I'm just a guy that wrote a book, you know. So I do have a pretty good understanding of the radios because I spend 4 to 6 months writing a book. So you do, and you know, everything that's in the book is something that I have tried and done, unless I say otherwise. I'm not particularly big on D-Star, but I have tried it and it does work. And yeah, so I try not to put anything in the books that I haven't done myself. And that means you've got to go through every feature and every function and find out how it works and how it needs to be set, because that's the whole point of the books.
Writing a lot of things, I know what you mean. I think actually that's the way you actually learn it the best. When you sit down and have to write about it, then you're really going through it and learning a lot about the radio. So you are probably the expert.
Yeah, well, yeah, maybe. I don't know. Anyway, I try and help people. I do, you know, I put them in my fan mail folder. I probably get one a week or thereabouts, so it's not too onerous.
Yeah. Well, Anthony didn't tell you, Andrew, but he's kind of the Elmer to a lot of us here. I think he got half the club set up on FT8. I had trouble doing it, and he certainly helped me out. So those people in the world that are Elmers are very helpful to the rest of us.
Yeah, and there are very good YouTube videos and things like that, which I use as well out there. And a few of them, you know, I have actually put a link in the book because you know, somebody's done a lot of work on something and provided a really good explanation.
So, Andrew, I assume your books are available on Amazon. Is that correct?
Yeah, they are. They're on Amazon. They're on Amazon Kindle as well. And yeah, thanks, Pat. And they're also sold in the RSGB bookshop. They were on the ARRL bookshop, but they seem to have dropped all the RSGB titles now, so they're not there anymore. There are, beware not to buy them anywhere else, because some eBay people, they sell them at what looks like a good price, and then you find out that you're paying 3 times as much for freight, and they take 6 weeks to get there. And what they are doing is they're buying them on Amazon and reselling them on eBay. There is one gentleman, K6RO, who's got a eBay web shop, and he has bought books from me for selling on eBay. I don't know what prices he will charge for those.
I noticed your reference to the Lord of the Rings with the one cable to rule them all. How close to Christchurch was the filming?
Yeah, some of it was quite local. The bits, you know, I can't really explain it. But yes, there's an area called Castle Hill just between us and the ski fields up in the foothills of the Alps, and a lot of the areas where they're sort of riding through tussock land and wilderness filmed there. They also did quite a lot down south. Actually, my cousin's wife, who's unfortunately UK now, but she had big horses, and the sort of draft horses, Clydesdales, and they were used for the dark riders early on in the film. And these big black guys with these huge horses, they were her horses.
That's great.
So I'm almost famous.
I would like to make a comment if I could.
Go ahead, Pat.
You talked about the difference in the difference in the band scope on the radios. I have a Yaesu, the little mobile that they came out with about 2 or 3 months ago. Actually, it's been probably closer to a year ago. I think it's the 8. Pardon me a second while I look here. 8 something or other.
891, Pat?
Yeah, it's the 891. You compare that with the band scope and on the 7300 or pretty much any ICOM, the difference is just night and day. It just amuses me that even in their newer radios, the Yaesu's not coming out with a band scope that's decent. In order to use the Yaesu band scope, you have to let it run through the band once. Even on I use Ham Radio Deluxe for both radios, and when you go to look at the band on the 891, it doesn't do it. Where if you bring up the band scope on the 7300, it's there. You can see what's going on. It's amusing that they're paying so much money for that radio, and they still don't have a clue as far as the band scope goes.
Yeah, it's probably a little bit unfair. The 891 is not an SDR, so it doesn't have a wide band scope. It has a fairly narrow band scope. I'm not familiar with the radio, but yeah, you're right. It just takes a while, and it has to sort of build up the picture. The band scope that's in the FTDX 101 is an SDR band scope. They actually put two SDR, direct sampling SDR receivers in it, which are not used for the receiver. They're only used to create the band scope for the main band scope and the sub band scope. So it's like having a couple of little SDR dongles inside it, just to do the band scopes. And so they have a fairly decent band scope. I just find it clunky in comparison, and things like you can't adjust the level of the band scope. You can't make it into a single line the way you can on the ICOM. You can't, I don't think you can turn the fill mode off either. It's just not fully implemented. And the fix, they have a fix and a center mode in the ICOM, where in the center mode, the VFO frequency is in the center, and you can see frequencies either side of that, and as you tune, it moves. But it still stays centered on the VFO. And then you have the fixed mode, where you can tune across the display bandwidth. That fixed mode doesn't work properly in the Yaesu. It's just not right. It's plain awful. So I was really disappointed with that.
My sentiments too.
Andrew, quick question. With the obvious lead that ICOM has taken in ham radio rigs using the SDR technology, do you think this may be a death blow to the Kenwoods and perhaps Yaesu? And I'm a Yaesu fan. I have a couple of FT920s that I think are the greatest rigs were at the time out there. We use them for our field day for years, and they've just been dependable. But I have a 7300 now, and it's a phenomenal machine also.
I don't think it's a death knell. I'm sure that Yaesu are just lagging. They're lagging behind, and they will get there, I'm sure. They definitely need to improve the band scope on the new radio, and of course most of the radios, the FTDX 101 is the only SDR in their range, so they've got some catching up to do, but I'm sure they will. Kenwood I'm worried about, because I like the Kenwoods a lot. I've never owned one, but they're definitely high quality. And the Kenwood people, they buy that radio because it's a very high quality radio with very good specs, but it's just lagging behind. They don't have an SDR at all. They don't have two receivers. The one that has got two receivers is astronomically expensive, because it's the FT990, and I mean, fantastic radio, but wow, you're talking about $13,000. So we are here anyway. But I hope not. I'm worried about Kenwood, because Kenwood's becoming very difficult to buy, and apparently there's supply chain problems with it. The Yaesu, I'm sure they will continue to be popular. They've got a huge base of people that love them and wouldn't look at anything else. And they just need to catch up technology-wise.
Yeah, quick question, Andrew, and maybe a comment. Yeah, I'm not into the SDRs that much. I've been radio guy over 60 years. I still like knobs on the front of my radio that I can adjust things. And what I found so I have an FT 2000D now, Yaesu. And even with that, where you get into the menu and you can find some of the things, if you don't use them all the time, you have to look at the book and find out where it was, for me anyway. And like I say, I'm still just into the knobs on the front of the radio. And a quick comment, not to totally get off the subject here, but I'm sure Anthony and I, or he would be interested. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but we have a show here, Mighty Trains. Anthony and I are train guys, and there was a show on the Kiwi Express, which runs in New Zealand. I don't know if you're familiar with that at all, but it was just very interesting to see a train show from New Zealand.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that. We do have one. We have very few passenger trains, long distance passenger trains in New Zealand now. We ran our railway down to virtually nothing, and it's a real shame. One of the things was that when we we started off with trains back in the 1800s or whatever, they went to the same gauge that the British were using, which was narrow gauge, and that really limits the speed, and we've never upgraded that. Every other country has gone to a wider gauge, which means you can go faster, and we never did. Also, it was government run, and we really ran the rail down. So where we should be freighting all our timber and coal and things like that, all that non-perishable stuff, should be in containers and things, that all should be on rail, and it isn't. It's all on the roads. So that's a bit of a shame. We do have some passenger trains. We have a very nice one that runs out of Christchurch. Actually, we've got two that run out of Christchurch. One goes over to the west coast, which is very scenic, and the other one goes up the east coast through Kaikoura, which is also very scenic. It's quite a long way. It's quite a lot slower than driving. It probably takes 6.5 hours versus about 4 hours to drive to Picton, so 4.5. So you've got to be doing it for the scenery.
Andrew, before I forget, could you go over and hand back the hosting to me? Just go click on the participants at the bottom.
Yeah.
And then you look for my name. It says Anthony KZT. And then click on the more to the right of it, and you can make me the host.
Make host. You and change host. Yes.
Thank you.
Well, Andrew, I know you've sold at least one book here tonight.
Good.
It'll be here Saturday afternoon.
Yeah, well, I hope I know people find them useful because I get good feedback, and so I seem to have hit a niche, which is kind of accidental, really, because I only wrote that 7610 book because I wasn't happy with the manual, and they've been very good, and the 7300 book's been very, very good. And now I started writing the books because I wanted to be able to buy one of those IC 756 type radios with a band scope, and now I can. So it's all worked out rather well because the books pay for the radios.
Yeah.
Andrew, this is Roger, W8VE. I'm a member of the Canton Amateur Radio Club, and I know Tom up there, and Tom told me QCWA get together that you were going to be here. My question is, we currently run 2A at the Canton Club, and how do you compare the front end overload? We just have one 7300 now, and I think we're thinking about buying another one. Is it superior? Is the SDR inferior, superior for close in work when you're running the stations at field day?
it should be much better, certainly much better than an old radio. You imagine using an old FT101 for field day, just wouldn't be viable at all. SDRs have a higher dynamic range than conventional radios. It's just because of the way the ADC works. And so they should cope with close-in signals better than a conventional radio. And you don't get AGC pumping. So when you get a close-in signal on a conventional radio, it goes, oh, big signal, and it turns the AGC down, which turns the receiver sensitivity down, which means you lose the weak signal that you were trying to work. And you don't get that as much with an SDR. It should be better. That said, you've still probably got, if you're using multiple radios at high power on multiple bands, it's the same as a contest situation. You probably should put some filtering on. You'll soon tell because you get an overload light, and the whole pan adapter will go crazy if it's overloaded. SDRs work, they're like most digital things. They work and work and work, and then when they crash big time. So if you're getting overload, then whack in some, or turn down the RF gain, or whack in some front end attenuation, and you'll probably fix it. But yeah, same rules as any multi-contest sort of situation. Doesn't do any harm to have some big filters in there, just to stop the overloads. But yet, generally, I would say it should be better than a conventional radio.
I have one question, if you don't mind.
Go ahead, Jevin.
All right. Well, it's on the topic of the spectrum scope. So I do quite a bit of contesting, and I use the spectrum display feature in the N1MM app. And I like to limit the display to, say, 8 kilohertz, just to keep the spots, okay. So I've been using it in center mode, but I'd like some way to be able to have it in fixed mode, but only have, say, like 10 kilohertz. Do you know of any way to
Yep.
do that?
Yes, you can do that with the ICOM. You can set 3 band edges per, I think there's something like 13 frequency zones. So you can set that down to, I think, a minimum of 5 kilohertz. So yes, you could set a band edge that says, okay, I want to go from 14.1 to 14.15, or something like that, something narrow. Very good for CW, because you can just say, okay, I want 14.0 to 14.06 or something like that, something quite narrow, and it gives you a fixed pan adapter at that bandwidth, and that's all adjustable in the ICOM. You get 3. If you hit the edge button, if you're in fixed mode and you hit the edge button, it will step through the 3 preset settings, and you can change all those 3 settings to anything you want. A maximum of a megahertz and a minimum, I think, of 5 kilohertz. So yep, you can definitely do that with an ICOM. Can't do it with the EOC. Just saying.
Thanks a lot.
Any other questions out there?
Yeah, I have one more question. I have a friend that has the Yaesu FT991, and I know I went up and picked it up from DX Engineering with them a year or 2 ago, and they seem to be pushing it much more than the FT7300. Do you have any opinion? Of course, is the 991, it's not software defined?
No, it's not. It's not a software-defined radio. Its big advantage is that it's a multi-band radio, so you get all the HF bands and VHF and UHF all in one radio. You get 100 watts. So if you're on a limited budget, it's a really good option, because you get all the, pretty much all the usually used bands all in one box for a reasonably good price. And it's what I call a DC to daylight radio. So yeah, a good option. Not an SDR, not a spectacular performer, but a good solid radio at a good price. Does it all if you're on a limited budget and you can't afford 3 radios.
Okay, thank you. Have you ever done any testing on any of the Yellowcraft K3, K3S, etc.?
No. I own a KX3, which has got a superb radio receiver in it. Very simple SDR design. The K3 is not an SDR, but the KX3 is an SDR. I don't know about the KX2. It probably is an SDR. It's a QSD technology, so it's quite a primitive SDR, if you like, but it has a very, very good receiver in it. The K3, I believe, is very good with the new synthesizer in it, the S model. The synthesizer's lower phase noise than the older one, and you can, if you've got a basic K3, you can upgrade it to the new synthesizer. It will improve the selectivity and make it nicer to listen to because it's a better oscillator. But I haven't tested one. I've used one in a contest club, but I've never tested one.
Thank you.
Well, Andrew, would like to thank you very much for presenting this evening. Is there any other questions before we say 73 to Andrew?
No, I would just like to make one comment again to thank you, Andrew, but also since I've got all your icon books and I happen to have all those radios, all I can tell you is if you have one of those radios and you don't buy Andrew's book, you're crazy. But they really are good, and they've helped me get things set up the way I want them in each of those radios. So they really are a worthwhile purchase. Certainly a lot less than the radio was, and they will help you out a lot. So thank you again, Andrew.
Yes, thank you, Andrew. It's been a pleasure meeting you, sir, and great presentation.
And we're all going to meet him on the air right now.